My first interaction with Rahul was through his company, Superhuman. For those who don't know, on the surface, Superhuman is an email client that gained buzz for many, many reasons. One is that it costs $30 a month. So I requested access and got in. So I was ready to pay to check my email. And as I was going through something very novel, a live in-person onboarding process, I was told, no, we can't sell you Superhuman. So what a rare experience. You can't buy our product. We won't sell it to you, even though you're ready to pay. Well, it turned out that because I wanted to use it for multiple accounts, toggling, and Superhuman hadn't launched that yet. They since have, by the way. They didn't want me to have a less than stellar experience. So rather than sell me something that didn't solve my problem, they'd rather wait. So to me, this was bold. It struck me so deeply. It was focused, it was committed. And a quick side note, by the way, I later got in Superhuman and I've been a paying user for 2 years. So maybe this approach works. But this leads to a ton of stuff to talk about. So audience, place your questions in the Zoom chat. And if chosen, you're going to get a chance to talk to Rahul directly. But either way, hey, Rahul, welcome to Founder Summit 2020.
Hey, thank you for having me. So happy to be here. Good morning, everybody.
Good. So glad you're here. We've got a nice full room and people still coming in, but I want to jump right in. So let's start with onboarding and start with this experience I just talked about. In this whole era of move fast, ship it, we'll fix it on the fly, let's go, growth at any cost, Superhuman is telling people, first off, tell us that you want to buy the product, and then let us onboard you in person, and then let's wait and make sure we can solve your problem, which is so cool. Very counterintuitive to what we see. So talk us through your philosophy for user onboarding.
Well, I've seen a lot of companies, especially in our space, which I would broadly define as productivity, get this wrong. I no longer believe in the traditional launch. Let's say you've built a new email client or a new task manager or a new calendar app. Now, the surface area for these products is absolutely massive. It's bigger than almost any domain that you could think of. And what that means is you also get a massive surface area for bugs, as well as massive variability in how users want to use the product. Now, most companies will just launch their app, and because demand for these types of products is so high, it's relatively easy to quickly get tens of thousands of users. But guess what? These users will find thousands of bugs, and that company would quickly get overwhelmed. They would not be able to fix the issues fast enough, and so those users will become disappointed, churn out of the product, and then tell everybody about their experience. And that is the very definition of a net detractor. So in my experience, it's significantly better to do what we do, which is to onboard customers at a measured pace every single week. And that way you have the bandwidth to fix any issues that they might find, and you can focus on making them extraordinarily happy.
You're muted, Sunny.
Oh, thank you guys. Thank you guys. Appreciate that. That was Ha's little thing. Okay, so Rahul, you said that Silicon Valley is good at going to where what users need, but maybe not so good at getting to what users feel. So tell me what you mean here, and tell me how this relates to user retention.
Well, Superhuman is productivity software, but I'm really a gamer at heart for those who know me. And today, our business software feels like work. We have to check our email. We have to submit expense reports. We have to enter data in our CRM. And what I've always asked is this: what if we could make software feel less like work and more like play? And with game design, I believe we can. Now, most software companies worry about what users want or what users need, but no one needs a game to exist. There are no requirements. And when you make a game, you don't worry about what users want or need, you obsess over how they feel. And when your product is a game, people don't just use it, they play it. They find it fun, they tell their friends, they fall in love with it. And so game design turns out to be an altogether different kind of product development. And that's what I think we could all get better at.
Okay, so you wrote an article about product market fit, which obviously relates to the whole user onboarding process. That article became the most widely shared entrepreneurship article of 2019, which really kind of blew my mind. And look, it was shared to me directly, organically, and was very impactful to me personally. It was so impactful that that very article actually spawned an entire company, Viable Fit, that does what you discussed in the article. For those who haven't seen it, go to First Round, check out Rahul's product market fit article. It will change the way you think about it. So before people go and read that article, Rahul, how should founders approach product market fit in their go-to-market strategy and along the journey? And how will they know when they've achieved product market fit?
Well, as we all know, product market fit is the number one reason why startups succeed. And the lack of product market fit is the number one reason why startups fail. But until recently, it has been very hard to actually define product market fit, especially in a quantitative way. And so this was a big challenge for me at Superhuman, where we were facing a multi-year build, and I needed a way of explaining to the team that we were not yet ready to launch. And so I came up with a framework that we call the product market fit engine. And the engine not only gives you a way to define product market fit, but a metric to measure product market fit and a methodology to systematically increase product market fit. And it can even generate your roadmap for you, a roadmap that is essentially guaranteed to increase this product market fit metric. So the question is, how do you define it? Well, when I was on this journey, I looked to the giants upon whose shoulders we stand, folks like Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator. He would say product market fit is when you made something that people want. Or Sam Altman, who would say that it's when users spontaneously tell other people to use your product. But it is Mark Andreessen who has perhaps the most vivid definition. He would say, you can almost always feel it when product market fit is not happening. Customers aren't quite getting value. Users aren't growing that fast. Word of mouth is not spreading. Press reviews are kind of blah, and the sales cycle is taking too damn long. But you can always feel it when product market fit is happening. Customers are buying as fast as you can add servers. You're hiring sales and support as fast as you can. Reporters are constantly calling about your hot new thing. Money is piling up in your checking account, and investors are staking out your house. Now, as vivid and as compelling as Andreessen's definition of product market fit is, and it is very vivid and it is very compelling, it is still a lagging indicator. By the time investors are staking out your house, guess what? You already have product market fit. And so in the April of 2017, I started my search for the Holy Grail, for a way to define product market fit, for a metric to measure it, and for a methodology to systematically increase it. Now, I searched high and low, I read everything I could find, I spoke with all the experts, and I came across this guy, Sean Ellis. Now, Sean had found a leading indicator, one that is benchmarked and predictive. Just ask your users this: how would you feel if you could no longer use the product? And measure the percent who answer very disappointed. After benchmarking hundreds of startups, Sean found that the companies that struggle to grow always get less than 40% very disappointed. And the companies that grow the most easily almost always get more than 40%. So if more than 40% of your users would be very disappointed without your product, you have initial product market fit. And like you said, Sonny, for founders who are interested to learn more, just check out the essay, search for Superhuman product market fit. And there is now even a company doing this. Check out Viable Fit, that's viable.fit. They're building software to make running the process super easy.
That's amazing. It's right in line with a tactic like NPS. Ask this one question, measure the percentage, and then go deeper and tweak your product until you get to that percentage. I mean, that's very actionable advice that founders can take. I love that framework. Nice and simple, based in a lot of research. Okay, such a big part of product strategy is pricing and positioning. This goes to product market fit. Is your product selling? So you've priced Superhuman at $30. we've been talking about pricing positioning since the dawn of the internet. Do we go freemium? Do we give away for free? Do I charge out of the gate? Do I go freemium and add more layers? Do I have three models, 5 models? It's a huge discussion. So how did you know people would pay to check their email? And how did you land on that number? Now, I know Superhuman does more than check their email. I'm a avid user, and you're welcome to talk about those features, but really I want to talk about pricing and positioning. So how did you know people would do that? And then how should founders, both on the software and hardware side, how should they approach pricing?
I would say that before you figure out pricing, you must really figure out your positioning. And when we did it, we started with this article by Ariel Jackson. I believe it's called Positioning Your Startup is Vital. Here's how to nail it. And she advises using a formula like the following. So for a target customer who has a need or an opportunity, your product is in a product category, it has a key benefit, and unlike its competing alternative, this is the way in which it's different. And in the article, she gives an example of Harley Davidson, the only motorcycle manufacturer that makes big, loud motorcycles for macho wannabes, and mostly in the US, who want to join a gang of cowboys in an era of decreasing personal freedom. Now, no matter how you feel about Harley Davidson or gangs of cowboys, see how precise and accurate that was. It captures the positioning accurately and precisely. And we thought about this hard for Superhuman, and in particular, the book Positioning: The Battle for Your Mind by Al Ries was super helpful. So, are we the Ford of email? No. Are we the Mercedes of email? Not quite. Are we the Tesla of email? Well, that kind of feels like we're getting there. So in 2015, we came up with the following positioning. For founders, CEOs, and managers of high growth technology companies who feel like their work is mostly email, Superhuman is the fastest email experience ever made. It's what Gmail could be if it were made today instead of 15 years ago. And unlike Gmail, Superhuman is meticulously crafted so that everything happens in 100 milliseconds or less. And we have, of course, since expanded significantly beyond that very defined target, but it's important to start off with that super defined niche. And when you hear that positioning, it's clear that Superhuman is a premium tool for a premium market. And once you know that, you can then figure out your pricing. And by the way, the best book on this topic is Monetizing Innovation by Madhavan Ramanujan. Now, in this book, Madhavan advocates for developing pricing alongside product in a way that supports the positioning you just came up with. And there are lots of ways to develop pricing. Now, we used one of the most quickest and the easiest methods, which is the Van Westendorp pricing sensitivity meter. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's not that complicated to do. So in late 2015, we asked 100 of our earliest users these questions. Number one, at what price would you consider Superhuman to be so expensive that you would not consider buying it? Number two, at what price would you consider Superhuman to be priced so low that you would feel the quality wouldn't be worth it? Number three, at what price would you consider Superhuman to be starting to get expensive so that it is not out of the question? You'd have to think about it, but you'd still end up buying it. And number four, at what price would you consider Superhuman to be a bargain, a great buy for the money? Now, the price points that supports a premium position is actually the third question. When does it feel expensive, but you'd still buy it anyway? One can imagine that Tesla did this with the Model S. And the median answer for the third question for us was $29 per month. Now, we then consulted with some pricing experts who explained to us that for a premium price point, you actually want to round up. Ending in a 9 conveys value. Ending in a round number conveys a premium or a high end of market product. And so we rounded up. Most companies tend to go after question number 4, most venture-backed companies anyway, because you tend to be in land grab mode. You tend to be entering a new market where you want all the users as rapidly as possible. Superhuman's rather an odd company in that we're going up against a massive incumbent. Everybody already has an email experience. Now, finally, once you have your pricing, the one thing I would suggest is to do a quick gut check of market size. For example, how can Superhuman grow into a billion-dollar valuation, the thing that you opened up with? Well, let's assume that at that point, the valuation is 10 times our run rate. So our ARR is 100 million. That would mean we need 300,000 subscribers at $30 a month. And that's conservatively assuming we don't have any other ways to increase average revenue per user, like bring out new products or going up markets. And so we asked ourselves, do we think that we can get to hundreds of thousands of subscribers? And we answered emphatically yes. And with that, we went ahead with the price.
Phenomenal answer, Rahul. Founders, I hope you're listening. There are two big messages there. Ask people, ask your customers, ask your market. So many times we build things and don't ask the questions. So amazing, so amazing. All right, hey, you've given so much rich advice. I want to ask you a personal question. You've had an amazing career already, and you're nowhere near done. I'd like to know a little bit about you. Where are you from? You know, tell me about where you grew up, but really focus on what memories and experiences stand out for you that shaped who you are.
An interesting question. So, as you can still sort of tell from my somewhat blended accent, I grew up not from here, but in the UK. I've been programming since I was about 8 years old. My dad was a surgeon and he was writing his PhD thesis. And so he had bought a 286 PC at the time. And once he'd finished writing his thesis, he just sort of had this toy lying around essentially. And so I taught myself how to program on the 286. And I did that so I could make video games. That has really been a driving force for me from a very early age. And at the time, I thought I would become a video game designer professionally. And I even briefly did so for a while. I worked on RuneScape, which back then was the largest free online role-playing game. It was a ton of fun to help build that. And by the time I was 15, I knew I wanted to be a founder. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I went to Cambridge. I studied computer science. I even started a PhD myself in machine learning and computer vision before either of those things were sort of remotely possible in the way that we think about them today. And after I graduated, most folks don't know this, I started 6 different startups, almost all of which went absolutely nowhere. Until I founded maybe you have a familiar story there, until I founded the 7th one, Reportive, which would go on to become extremely popular. It was the first Gmail extension to scale to millions of users. And later on, in about 2012, it only took 2 years, I would sell that to LinkedIn. And 5 years later, now I'm here. So it's been quite the journey. I'm very grateful for, if I could pick one thing, for the opportunity that my dad gave me by leaving this computer lying around when I was 8 years old. I think without that, none of this would have happened.
Yeah. Founders, I hope you're hearing. On the outside, it looks like everything's great, everything's perfect. It takes a lot of diligence to get it through. So you mentioned you're a game designer. Founders inherently use gamification in products at times to the point of cliche. Certainly back in the day. So what do founders get wrong on gamification, and how are you thinking about the principles of game design at Superhuman, and how does it show up?
Well, for folks thinking about this, I would start by saying this. Gamification does not really work. Game design works, but game design is not gamification. It is not simply taking your product and adding points, levels, trophies, or badges. And to understand why gamification does not work, we actually have to understand human motivation. And there's a very interesting study from Stanford that demonstrates the difference perfectly. So in the 1970s, these Stanford researchers recruited children aged 3 to 4 years old. And all of these kids were generally interested in drawing. Some kids were told they would get a reward, a certificate with a gold seal and a ribbon. Now, some kids were not told about any reward, and so they did not expect one or even know one existed. Now, each child was invited into a separate room to draw for 6 minutes, and then afterwards they either got the reward or not, depending on which group they were in. Now, over the next few days, the children were observed to see how much they would continue to draw by themselves. The children with no reward spent 17% of their time drawing. But the children who expected a reward, they only spent 8% of their time drawing. The
Wow.
reward had halved their motivation. So what's going on here? Well, it turns out that researchers differentiate intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. With intrinsic motivation, we do things because they are inherently interesting and satisfying. With extrinsic motivation, we do things to earn rewards and to achieve external goals. And that's the problem with rewards. They massively undermine intrinsic motivation. And that is why fundamentally gamification does not work. When gamification seems successful, it is because the overall experience was actually designed like a game from the ground up. So the real question, the one that I've spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about, is how do we design a good game?
Interesting. So how does that show up in the feature set in Superhuman? I mean, give us two examples.
Well, as it turns out, there's no unifying theory of game design. And to create games, we really have to draw on the art and science of a bunch of different things: psychology, mathematics, storytelling, interaction design, to name just a few. And before I jump into the two examples, let me first share the factors that we've identified, things that every founder should care about if they truly care about game design. They are: number one, goals; number two, emotions; number three, toys; number four, controls; and number five, flow. And at Superhuman, we've identified many principles of game design across all five of these factors. Now, maybe we can start with flow. One very counterintuitive principle would be create flow by balancing high challenge with high skill. And this is going to sound super weird, but in other words, make your product harder to use. Flow is a very elusive phenomenon. To understand it, we first need to break it down and define it. Now, fortunately for us, it's been heavily researched by psychologists for decades. Now, technically, flow is a state of mind that has 6 key parts. Number one, it's the intense and focused concentration on the present. Number two, it's so absorbing that we don't think about the future or worry about the past. Number three, it's so demanding that we don't care about what others think about us. I'm in flow right now, so I'm not really thinking about the audience. Number four, it's so easy that we always know what to do next. It's so powerful that it alters our subjective experience of time. Time can flash by in an instant or stretch out forever. And number six, this is the most important, it's so rewarding that the activity becomes intrinsically motivating. And we know that's the most powerful and effective form of motivation. Now, the $1 million question, or the $1 billion question, is how do you create it? Well, there are 5 conditions. Number one, we must always know what to do next. Number two, we must always know how to do it. Number three, we must always be free from distractions. Number four, we must get clear and immediate feedback. And number five, and this is the hardest and the weirdest of all, we must feel that balance between challenge and skill. If an activity feels too hard, we actually feel anxious. And if an activity feels too easy, we feel relaxed or bored. So let's take these conditions, we can break them down, we can think about Superhuman. Number one, knowing what to do next. Now, we can all make product decisions that make this dramatically easier for our users. In Gmail, when I archive an email, guess what? I'm now back on the inbox. I have to decide what to do next. And I have to do this rather preposterously every single time. This destroys flow. In Superhuman, when I archive that very same email, I automatically move to the next email. I don't have to take any decisions at all. That simple change starts to create flow. Number two, knowing how to do it. Now, early on, we saw that users would forget our keyboard shortcuts. For those that don't know, Superhuman is an aggressively keyboard shortcut-driven interface. It's actually deliberately annoying to use with the mouse. Now, these users, they knew what they wanted to do, but they didn't know how to do it. And so we built Superhuman Command. Just hit Command K and type in what you want to do. Not only will Superhuman then do it for you, it will teach you the shortcut for next time. Number three is freedom for distractions. In Superhuman, you can't see the inbox at the same time as any given conversation. And so very deliberately, you can't see what's coming up next, and you can't see any new email as it comes in. So you too can design your interface like this to reduce distraction and to create flow. Number four was clear and immediate feedback. When you archive a conversation in Superhuman, we immediately show you the next one. And we've invested hugely in doing that as quickly as possible. Initially, we set out to do this in 100 milliseconds or less. We now have a new renderer that is 3 times as fast. And so we can now do this in less than 32 milliseconds. And for those founders who have a technical background and who've done any web programming, you'll know that that is less than 3 frames of Chrome. Each Google Chrome frame actually only takes 16 milliseconds. So that's less than 3 frames of the web browser. And number 5, high perceived challenges, high perceived skills. Like I said, if the challenge is too easy, your users will be bored. And if the challenge is too hard, your users will feel anxious. And we see this all the time in email. People come to us, for the most part on the other side, and they say, oh my gosh, my email is so hard, I'm feeling anxious. And Superhuman massively increases the skill level for almost everybody. But what if your email wasn't that challenging, or you were already skilled in the first place? Imagine if we onboard a Gmail power user. Well, if we don't do anything else, you're still not in flow. And so that's when this crazy sounding idea comes in. We increase the challenge level. So we provide a challenging goal. Not just hit inbox 0, but hit inbox 0 without ever touching your mouse. This balances challenge with skill, and it results in flow, that most elusive of psychological phenomena. So that's a quick tour de force on flow, 0 to 1 on flow, if you will. We can talk about toys if you like, or we can move on.
Yeah, no. Let's move on, because you just outlined an infrastructure that everybody can apply to their company if they, take the effort. Let's move on to you. You're a founder. You've had multiple startups, most of which have failed. Now you have some wildly interesting companies that are successful, one you're running today. You've also become an investor. You've even invested in the company, Viable Fit, that I talked about early on. So 2-part question for our audience, a lot of which are founders in the early stage. As an investor, put on your investor hat. What are you looking for in the company? What are you looking for in the founder?
Well, let's take the company first. I'm fairly sector agnostic, and I love to invest really early. And obviously I love productivity, that's my wheelhouse. And especially those tools which end up being what I call viral SaaS. And Tandem would be a great example. For those who don't know, they're building a digital office for remote teams. Super valuable if you're trying to create a great place to work, a great culture, a great workplace in these remote times. And closely related is what I would call a business infrastructure. These are tools that are often not directly used by end users, but they can become incredible companies. Clearbit and EasyPost would both be great examples. They're powerful businesses, and once they're integrated, they become incredibly sticky. And for all of these companies, I invested super early. These days, you'd call it pre-seed, typically one of the first few checks into the company. Now, finally, I look for the possibility of a billion-dollar outcome. This is super important. Many times, I often end up passing on great founders with good products because I was not able to get to conviction that the business could support a huge outcome. That actually turns out to be the most common reason why I would pass on a deal. So switching over now to what I look for in founders. Well, I look for founders who have the following magic combination. Number 1, they know how to make something people want, that classic Paul Graham adage. And number 2, and this is the other side of the same coin, they know how to make people realize they want it. Now, if a startup only has one of these, it will unfortunately not be able to succeed. Secondly, I look for founders that demonstrate exceptionally high levels of grit. I think of grit as the combination of passion and perseverance. Passion means that the founder will not get easily distracted with, let's say, new interests or goals, and perseverance means that the founder will follow through on hard things despite challenges. And Sonny, we were talking about this in our pre-meet call. It is really, really hard. I need someone who's not going to get distracted. Now, the founders that have both are persistent and relentless in moving towards making their startup successful. And that's exactly what you need in order to build a billion-dollar outcome.
Fabulous. Uh, I could go on and on all day. I need to turn it over to the audience here, Rahul. A really, really rich audience here who's going to be asking questions on their own. So, audience, as you know, you are welcome to share screenshots of Rahul, hashtag Superhuman, hashtag Sparrow Ventures, Founder Summit, hashtag Never Give Up, all over social media. Feel free to spread the word. But we're going to give the microphone to Tony Ramos. Tony Ramos, you have Rahul live. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks, Sonny. Hi, Rahul. Quick question here. How do you separate the noise from the signal when you're receiving early customer feedback?
This is actually precisely the topic of the product market fit engine. So I didn't cover it earlier, but I'll give a brief flyby. It is a very astute question. So for those who've tried this before, you'll know that the feedback can be extremely noisy. And if you just built everything that people asked for, then you'd end up with a complicated, muddled product that lacks any notion of vision. And teams that are very focused around data, I've noticed, are apt to do that. On the other hand, you could go the other extreme and just build what you feel like building or what you think the market wants. And teams that are very oriented vision or with particularly charismatic, let's say founders or product leaders, are apt to do that. Now in practice, clearly the optimal thing is something in the middle. A combination of very astutely listening to your customers, but being future thinking, being creative, being innovative, and leaning into the vision that you hold so dear. So how do you actually do this? And how do you do this in a way that is guaranteed to take you towards product market fit? That's the topic of the engine. Very quick summary. So you send your customers 4 questions. How would you feel if you can no longer use the product? What is the main benefit of the product for you? Who do you think is most likely to appreciate the product? And number 4, how can we improve the product for you? And you run through the engine and you're seeking to find what the main benefit of the product is. The way that you do that is you take only the set of people who say that would be very disappointed without your product. Remember, these are the set of people who love your product. And then you analyze their answers to question number 2, which is what is the main benefit of the product for you? Now for Superhuman, it actually has lots of benefits. But the main benefit, the one that all of the very disappointed users, the users who love the product, always agree on, is that it is blazingly fast. You can do everything from the keyboard, and it keeps you in focus and in flow. And that's how I knew early on that those were the things to orient around. You can then use that to filter all of the rest of the feedback. So you then go to all of the rest of the feedback, and we have 3 sources of it: very disappointed, somewhat disappointed, and not disappointed. Let's go into the somewhat disappointed set of people. Now, this is a really interesting set of people because chances are that some of these people are on the fence. If you built the things that they asked for, they would actually convert into being very disappointed and they would become fanatical evangelists of your product. But how do you tell which ones? Well, the trick is to segment that subset by the main benefits. Correlate the main benefit that you just calculated into the main benefit that they all said, and you end up with 2 subsegments: the segment for whom the main benefit resonates and the segment for whom the main benefit does not resonate. Now, as hard as it is to do, I would politely disregard all of the feedback from the set of people for whom the main benefit does not resonate. Why? Because even if you built all the things that they asked for, they still don't care about the thing that makes your product special. But I would laser focus on the other segment, the segment for whom the main benefit does resonate. Why? Because if you build all the things that they asked for, they're now indistinguishable from the set of people who fall in love with your product. And that is how you separate the signal from the noise.
Next question is from Tessa Moo. Tessa, you have the microphone. Ask Rahul. Tessa, you're live.
All right, it was prompting me to unmute and I couldn't until I think you gave me permission.
All right.
Hi, Rahul. It's so nice to meet you. I've used Superhuman since 2018 and it's really transformed my life and work process in a lot of ways. So grateful for you for building something amazing. But I have two questions. The first being, you decided to take on something as enormous and massive as email, which obviously has very big legacy incumbents in place. Can you share a little bit about what it felt like in the beginning to take on such a Goliath, and if there was ever moments of doubt and how you kind of navigated that?
I just didn't think about it too hard.
Yeah.
Here's the thing for anyone taking on a Goliath or an incumbent. In many senses, it's actually easier. It's easier to take on an incumbent in a market that they feel like they've already dominated. The way that you do it is you sub-segment down to a niche that it doesn't make sense for them to go after. Google actually gave us the perfect example. Inbox, we all remember Inbox, long may it rest in peace, reached 500 million users. Imagine if any of our companies reached 500 million users. I think we would all call it a runaway success, and that should be able to support $1 billion outcome, no matter what the business model was. Yet it was cancelled because that's not good enough for Google. And therein lies the secret in being able to compete or go up alongside an incumbent. If 500 million users, if Google Inbox isn't big enough for Google, why would they care about what we're building at Superhuman? Why would they care about us being $1 billion company with just 300,000 subscribers when Gmail itself has 1.5 billion users? This is why one of my recipes for coming up with interesting business ideas is find a space that everyone believes is done, where there are maybe one or two gigantic companies that just sit in there with products that are essentially commodity, one-size-fits-all solutions, and then see if you can segment out a niche that's interesting. And with email, it was so fascinating because, and this is a question that I often ask engineering interview candidates, so I'll give out the question on stream. What is the average number of emails that a Gmail user receives per day? And because we all work super hard and we're all knowledge workers, like our natural instinct is 100, 200, 300, 400. The average number of emails that a Gmail user receives per day, these are emails that they actually have to do something about, is 5.
Wow.
Right? And that it's crazy when you, and now it all starts to make sense, and you look at Gmail and you realize it truly is this one-size-fits-all t-shirt, everything from extra small all the way to extra, extra large, and yet we're all somehow expected to be comfortable inside of it and to be productive. It just doesn't make any sense. And so I quickly realized this, and I was like, well, I know from my repulsive days and from running all of the email integrations at LinkedIn that there is a set of people who includes basically everybody on this call that does email for a living. For us, email is work and work is email. We do email for 2, 3, 4 hours a day or more. We're using the same tool as everyone else. We would happily pay for something that saves us hours per week that can promise to maintain inbox 0. And I had a vision in my mind for what that is. And it turned out to work. So now all of our users save hours per week. And we recently did this analysis, so I'm super excited to share the numbers. 36% of our customers now hit inbox 0 within the onboarding itself, and 4 hours of our customers hit talking nonsense. 50% of our customers hit inbox 0 within 4 hours of starting to use the product, which is super exciting.
So
I hit it every single day. It's wonderful.
Thank you, Tessa. I want to piggyback on that, Rahul. So what you're saying with that philosophy is that you could start a social network, right? I mean, the incumbent would be Facebook. You're saying there's a business to be had with a social network with 400 million users. Is that true? Is there a space there, Rahul?
So this is a very interesting possible counterpoint to my argument, which is I'm not sure that it works for network effect businesses.
Interesting.
Because in network effect businesses, the product is the network. Why does eBay still exist? Because the product is eBay. The product of Facebook is the fact that everyone is on it, right? So it's very different to Superhuman, where the product is actually all of the, I don't even know how many hours we put into it, but the 5 years of investment that we've spent building Superhuman, that's a very different notion of what the product is. So I do think that network effect companies are an interesting counter argument to this. And that's why they end up being so resilient.
That'll be the topic of our next talk. Okay, question 3, Vyoma Patel, you have the microphone, unmute and ask Rahul.
Can everyone still hear me okay?
Yes.
Go ahead, Vyoma.
I'd love to know if the leading indicator still works on no-code MVP, or do you have to have a product built?
If the leading indicator, can you say that one more time? Did anyone
She
else
said,
catch the question?
does the leading indicator still work on a no-code MVP? Or do you have to already have the product, or do you have to have the product already built? So a no-code MVP, let me just, you get it. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. I would say yes. I would say if your no-code MVP is functional enough to meet the need of the user and to convey the core value proposition, and it's built out enough that they can actually experience it, who cares if it's a no-code MVP? In fact, that sounds better to me. Now, at some point, you're going to want to take it in-house. Presumably, you'll want to make everything pretty and feel good and have the experience be super smooth and fluid. But if that's not important to your target market, now it happens to be for Superhuman because we're a premium product, but if that's not important for your target market and you believe that it's a somewhat accurate representation of the thing that you're trying to do, absolutely. I think that the product market fit engine can work.
Good. Up next, Masha Kroll. Masha, unmute yourself. You have the podium. Ask Rahul.
Great. Hi, Rahul. Thanks for this session. My question is actually riffing on Vyoma's a little bit. So Sean Ellis's framework that you mentioned before assumes you have users, which doesn't really help you define an MVP pre-launch. So is it kind of an educated guess until you launch, which we like to call strategy, or is there an alternative metric that we could use?
I have an alternative process. I can outline what we did. So
great.
Yes, it began with an educated guess. It's often said that we find our business ideas from the work that we drew. Nothing could be more true for me. So in the process of running a Reportive and running email integrations at LinkedIn, it became very clear to me that there was this huge need for a super fast, beautiful email experience with all of the browser plugin functionality just built right in, that was keyboard shortcut driven, that just worked offline, and all of the other good things. So I inherently believed that, but I didn't just follow it without validation. And so what I did in year one was create this landing page. It didn't look super pretty. It was just a simple Squarespace page with some stock photography basically on it. And it had an email sign-up box. And then I figured out some clever ways to drive traffic to that page. And I'll put a pin in that because that's not really the topic of the conversation. But if folks are interested, we can talk to that. And then here's the trick. Whenever anybody signed up for Superhuman, they would receive an email from me. Now, this was an automatic email, but it was written so as to look like it was actually from me. And the most important thing is if anyone replied, and a significant percentage of people did, it would actually be me. And the two questions that I asked were, number one, what do you use for email today? And number two, what do you love about it? What do you hate about it? And what I found was that almost every single person who was signing up for our thing was coming from Gmail, which is pretty interesting, right? No one was coming from Outlook, at least back at that time. And no one was really using third-party email clients, which was a counterintuitive conclusion. You might think that the market for our products, well, they're using Airmail and Spark and all of the other third-party email clients. No, our customers are all in Gmail today. And what I learned was that the time that we can all just about remember, maybe 15 years ago, when Gmail was super cool and people loved it, has long since gone. Nobody loves Gmail anymore. People find it really slow, really crufty. and they hate how much time they spend in it. And the 10% of people who were coming from third-party email clients, we found that they hated how buggy they were, how they didn't sync properly, and how they didn't work offline. Now, here's the trick, is you engage in conversation for as long as you possibly can. And so I have a few sort of sentences that I always use to do that. So let's say that you said to me, hey, I use Gmail and I use Boomerang. I would say, awesome. I'm curious, what features about Boomerang do you find must have? And you would probably say, well, I use the reminders feature and I use the send later feature and maybe the grammar check. And I would say, oh, that's really interesting. How would you stack rank these features in terms of value to you? And then you would probably say, well, we're like 4 emails in at this point. Reminders, grammar checker, send later. And I would be like, oh, super cool. By the way, we're working on reminders right now. What is the most commonly used time that you would snooze an email to? And so on and so on. And some of these chains would often go on for like 15, 20 emails long over the course of many days. Now, I did this for several hundred signups initially, and then it got to the volume where I could no longer really do it. So I asked my head of growth to take over. This was actually his main function in that first year of Superhuman. And here's the amazing thing. In that first year, we interviewed 1,000 people like this. So on average, that's 3 people a day. Now, I know that you hear all the time, well, you got to get out of the office and talk to people. And now that may sound harder than ever, but actually it's easier than ever because it's easy to get people on a Zoom call. But what I observed was you don't even need to get people on a call. You can just very efficiently email back and forth, and the people who are interested to talk to you will, and the people who aren't won't. And with relatively little energy, we interviewed 1,000 people like this in year number 1. Now that validated all of the things that I believed coming into the product from my experience at Reportive and at LinkedIn.
Very systematic. You created a consumer insights engine in the form of sign up. That is very clever. Okay, next question from the audience is Lindsay Michelides. Lindsay, you have the microphone. Ask Rahul.
Hi, Rahul. Thanks so much for your time in the session today. I was curious how and why you decided to go B2C versus B2B, given that you were focused on kind of a premium professional email user with your product.
Long story short, I looked at the relative trajectories and market caps of companies like Dropbox versus Box. And I realized that we could have a much, much greater outcome if we built something that could be adopted and sold individually. And then we figure out, much like Dropbox famously figured out, how to expand that to the enterprise. It was also a philosophical thing. I'm sure we've all been told to use software by previous managers or organizations, and it really sucks. When we don't have that agency, it's not the best, right? And we've all independently adopted software and then spread it through our organizations. Examples today would be things like Notion and Figma, tools that we all know and love, and we're excited to share them with our colleagues. And philosophically, I just decided, look, this is going to be the big company for me. I probably aren't going to do another startup after this. I want to build the kind of software that people all love to use, that they're begging their company to buy. That's the kind of software I want to build, and not to have to build a complex top-down sales motion on top of that.
Rahul, question for you. How other people are now trying to solve email. What Basecamp launched Hey. There's others that you likely know about. How do you view Superhuman's position, in this ecosystem of email? You got Gmail and that huge massive behemoth, and new incumbents coming in. Do you think about it like, hey, I'm competitive, I want to beat all of them, or you're like, let's go everybody, let's roll, we can all have 500 million users? How do you think about your position?
Yeah, definitely collaborative. I don't see Hey as competitive at all. I don't think, for example, it would be a good fit for anyone on this call The reason being, we've built Superhuman for the people who do work, and for the people for whom email is work, and the people for whom work is email. And the whole point about Superhuman is to be the best possible product if you're in email for multiple hours per day, and your goal is to hit inbox zero. And your goal would be to hit inbox zero if you are our archetype. And like we have this internally, this archetype of a user. We call her Nicole. Nicole works super hard. People depend on her. It's critical for her to be responsive over email, because if she's not, she could block her team, miss deals, not hire people, or worst of all, maybe damage her own reputation. And that will have compound effects for the rest of her career. And that's the kind of person that we're aimed after. Now, Hey famously is antithetical to the notion of inbox zero. You're not meant to care if you're in Hey, which is a very different approach to doing your email. It's much more consumer oriented. It's much more that mass market product, which shows in its price points of $100 a year. And so I believe that they're executing a very sensible strategy, and there is a set of people for whom it makes sense. It's absolutely not the set of people for whom email is work, and that is the position that we take. But I think in general, this will happen to every single industry that's dominated by an incumbent. It's possible to slice it into high-end, mass market, and possibly even vertically as well. You could imagine an email platform for realtors, for example, that has CRM components built in. So you can do horizontal segmentation and you can do vertical segmentation. And as software gets easier to use, riffing off this idea, or rather easier to build, riffing off this idea of no code and low code, I think we'll see more and more of that happening.
Wow, we could go on literally all day with dozens and dozens of audience questions, Rahul. But we're at time, and I want to ask the final question, if you don't mind. But before I do, I want to thank you so much for sharing your valuable time and taking time out of your day to join the Founder Summit for 2020. Can't tell you how much I appreciate you doing that. So last question for you. You know, I think it's enlightening for people to hear that you had been at this for some time. You mentioned earlier you started literally I think a handful plus of startups that didn't work. They failed. We can say they failed. They didn't work. One thing I've learned as well is as things grow and you're now sitting inside of this very successful company with a big flywheel spinning, sometimes that feels like you're ready to be done. There's those feelings, right? And you want to give up. So give your last word on advice to the founders here on, you know, how they should be handling that feeling of when they want to give up. The theme of this year's Founder Summit is never give up, you know, for multiple layers of reasons, right? 2020 has been quite a year. You know, reach into your heart and soul and impart some words of wisdom when the founder feels like, you know, it's Tuesday night at 9 p.m. and it's just not working. They want to give up. Where should they go? What should they grab to keep going?
Good question. I need to move my charger.
Oh yeah, don't die on that heavy question.
running a camera and microphone and everything off a laptop will kill it pretty quickly.
Sounds like you're hatching an idea for your next company.
All right, you all can still see me. Great.
We gotcha. Go ahead.
Excellent. Failure. What a heavy topic. Okay. Look, it's really, really hard. I can give the example of Rapportive. Most people don't know this. Rapportive skirted close to failure so many times. We were 2 weeks away from running out of money by the point where LinkedIn actually signed the definitive agreement to acquire the company. And for anyone who has been through or attempted to go through one of these processes, you'll know how insanely stressful that period is. I wholeheartedly agree with the idea of never giving up. And to give an example of some of the crazy things that we did, I can tell the story now. It's past the, wait, what year is it? 20,
yeah,
2022. Yeah, that's 8 years ago now. Cool.
Disclosures are done. Yeah, disclosures are cool. Go for it.
It's not even disclosures. I mean, we're like past all statutory and everything. It's more. It's awesome. A long time ago. I remember we were on Heroku at the time, and we were actually the largest app on Heroku. So much so that they had special instances provisioned for us and everything. And our monthly Heroku bill was huge, which, by the way, for an app that made no money was kind of a serious problem. And so we were doing the thing that, you know, many of us may have done when COVID started, of you go around all your vendors and you beg for mercy, essentially. And so I went to Heroku's, or I sent James Lindenbaum an email, and he was the CEO of Heroku at the time. He invited me to his office, and I sit down and, you know, kind of teary-eyed, I explained the situation. And he said, well, you know, had this been 6 months ago, I would have helped you, but we were just acquired by Salesforce, and I'm now a public company, so there's very little I can do for you. Like, you know, my hands are tied. And I was like, well, thank you for hearing me out. Even just being able to vent was useful. A day later, he sends me an email, and he's like, hey, I have an idea, head over to my office, smiley face. And I'm like, well, this is weird, what's happening here? So I wander over to his office, which was on like 10th and Mission, I think it was at the time, somewhere around there. And I go in, and he walks me into this room, and he sits me down, and he's like, okay, this is gonna stay in this room for the moment. It turns out that there is a bug in our accounting system. And what I'm suggesting you might want to think about doing is take your credit card and just cancel it. Because it turns out that with a canceled credit card, what we're going to do is just rebill it, and rebill it over and over and over again. Now you have 6 months to get your shit together. Go off and come back with that acquisition done, and LinkedIn can pick up the tab. And so I was like, wow, okay, thank you for this lease of life. And so he added roughly half a year's worth of runway to the company by doing that, which then allowed us to go and actually sell the company to LinkedIn. They were surprised at this sudden injection of runway. It changed the dynamic of the M&A negotiation. Suddenly we had a whole bunch of leverage once again, without having to dilute the company or raise a bridge round or anything. The acquisition got done, and LinkedIn ended up paying Salesforce's tab.